A child in the alley. The rain had just started to fall when Ella stepped out of the maintenance bay. The night air on Haven 6 Colony was sharp, quiet, and cold. He zipped his jacket and slung his tool pack over one shoulder. The day had been long. Too many machines breaking down, too many people needing things fixed for cheap or nothing. All he wanted now was to get home, warm up some soup, and disappear into the hum of his small apartment walls. But something stopped him at first. It was just a whisper in the wind, a sound he nearly ignored. Then it came again, soft, brittle, not wind, not machine, a cry. Ellis paused and turned his head toward the source. It came from the alley beside the old supply warehouse, long since shut down and half collapsed. The kind of place kids dared each other to explore during daylight but avoided like a curse after dark. He hesitated, but the cry returned, softer now, as if it knew someone was listening. He took a step, then another. The alley narrowed the deeper he walked, flanked by rusting crates and leaning metal walls. A weak light flickered overhead, casting jagged shadows. Then he saw her, small figure, cold behind a stack of scrap bins, tiny, shaking. At first he thought it might be a human child, then he saw the skin, lavender gray and thin like paper. Her limbs were too long, and her eyes, enormous and glossy black, reflected the trembling light like two glass mirrors. Her tangled silver hair stuck to her face in wet strands. She clutched something in her hand, an empty ration packet, torn and licked clean. Ellis knelt slowly, setting his tool pack aside. "Hey," he said, his voice low, careful, like approaching a wounded bird. "You okay?" The girl flinched and tried to press herself into the wall behind her. She didn't speak, just stared at him with wide, frightened eyes. "I'm not gonna hurt you," he said, lifting his hands to show he was empty. "I heard you crying. Thought maybe someone needed help." She said nothing, but her hands trembled around the plastic scrap. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a protein bar, slowly unwrapping it before placing it on the ground. Between them, "You hungry?" The girl stared at it, then at him. A few seconds passed. Then, with a twitch like a startled animal, she darted forward, grabbed the bar, and scampered back to her corner. She tore it open with tiny, sharp teeth and devoured it in a frenzy. Ellis didn't interrupt when she finished. Her shoulders relaxed a little. Not by much, but enough. "What's your name?" he asked. The girl hesitated, then whispered something, so quiet he almost missed it. "Rinya," he repeated it softly. "Rinya, that's a pretty name." "I'm Ellis." No response, but she didn't try to run. That was something. "Where's your family?" he asked, glancing around the alley. "Your mother, father?" Rinya looked down, her fingers curling into the dirty fabric of her shirt. She mumbled something again, this time in a language he didn't understand. Not Galactic Standard, not even one of the fringe dialects he'd picked up fixing old colony systems, just strange, soft syllables that sounded more like music than speech. "Okay," he said gently. "Don't worry, you don't have to talk, but you can't stay here. It's cold. It's dangerous." She didn't move. Ellis stood slowly and held out his hand. "Just for the night. Warm food. A roof. I promise." Rinya looked up at him again. Then, slowly, so slowly, she reached out and touched his fingers. That was enough. He led her out of the alley, wrapping his jacket over her small shoulders. She stayed close, her bare feet making no sound on the metal streets. People passed them without noticing. Just another mechanic. Just another shadow in the night. His apartment was small, tucked above the backup power station he managed. One room, one bed, a couch, a kitchen unit. It wasn't much, but it was safe. He gave her a towel and a blanket, heated up a can of stew and placed it on the table. She ate without speaking, hunched over the bowl like it might disappear. Watched her from across the room, unsure what to say or do. She was still trembling, even after food and warmth. He didn't ask more questions. He just let her be. Later, she curled up on the couch and stared at the ceiling. "Do you want me to call anyone?" he asked. Rinya shook her head. "Okay." A long silence stretched between them. Then, just as Ellis was heading to bed, she whispered, "Something you not sell me?" He froze. "No," he said, turning slowly to face her. "Never." She looked at him for the first time, not with fear but with something else, something soft. Hope, maybe, or just disbelief. She didn't say another word. She just closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep. Ellis stood there in the dim light of his apartment, staring at the tiny figure wrapped in a blanket on his couch. He hadn't planned for this, hadn't expected it, but somehow, it already felt like she belonged here, and that scared him more than anything else. The unspoken bond. The morning came slow and quiet. Ellis sat at the table with a mug of rehydrated coffee, watching the pale light from Haven 6's artificial sunrise stretch across the floor. The world outside still buzzed with drones and data, pads, shift, alarms and static comes. But inside, it was still, peaceful, in a way he hadn't felt in years. Rinya was still asleep, curled tightly on the couch beneath the blanket he'd given her. One tiny hand clutched the edge of the fabric like she expected someone to pull it away. Her breathing was soft but uneven, as though even dreams gave her no peace. Ellis didn't move. He didn't want to wake her, but part of him also didn't want to face the day, not until he figured out what came next. He knew the rules. Stray children, especially aliens, had to be reported to Haven's interspecies welfare division, protocol, paperwork, temporary housing at the sector for shelters. But those shelters were underfunded, overcrowded, and half-run by private security firms. He'd seen what happened to vulnerable kids in those places, and Rinya, she wouldn't last a week. She stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. At first, she looked around in confusion. Then her gaze found Ellis, sitting across the room, hands wrapped around a steaming mug. For a second, she looked like she might bolt, but then she stayed still. "Morning," he said softly. She didn't answer, but her fingers loosened their grip on the blanket. "I've got something for you." He stood and crossed to the counter, returning with a small packet wrapped in cloth. He set it on the table and backed away. Rinya sat up slowly, slid off the couch, and approached the bundle like it might bite her. Inside was a protein roll, an energy drink, and tucked at the bottom a tiny, worn plush animal. It had belonged to Ellis once, years ago, back when he still believed in softer things. Rinya reached out with cautious hands and picked up the toy. Her fingers explored its ears, its stitched button eyes. She didn't smile, but her breath hitched. "Can keep it," Ellis said. Her eyes flicked to him, uncertain. Then, very softly, she whispered, "Why?" He blinked. It was the first word she'd spoken since asking if he'd sell her. "Because you deserve more than cold metal and empty alleys," he said. "Everyone does." Rinya looked down, clutching the toy to her chest. She whispered something he couldn't catch. It sounded like a thank you, but not in any language he understood. Later, Ellis stepped out briefly to check the power grid systems for his day job. He kept it short. His mind wasn't on faulty relays or overheating converters, it was on the child sleeping in his apartment. When he returned, the door was locked, just as he'd left it. But something had changed. The apartment was clean, had wiped down the small counter with a cloth. The dishes he'd left in the sink were stacked neatly. Even the couch had been straightened, the blanket folded precisely along its seams. She sat cross-legged on the floor, scribbling symbols onto a scrap of old blueprint paper with one of his ink pens. Her posture was focused, almost ritualistic, and the symbols weren't just random marks, they were elegant, geometric, like constellations captured on paper. He didn't interrupt her. Instead, he quietly started preparing food. As he stirred the pot, she finally spoke again. "They won't come here." Ellis looked over his shoulder. "Who? The ones who chase?" He turned the burner down. "Are you running from someone?" Rinya, she didn't answer, but the look in her eyes said enough. "You're safe here," he said gently. "I promise." That night, as they sat on the floor eating rehydrated stew, Rinya asked a question that cut deeper than Ellis expected. "You will give me away?" The words felt like a knife. "No," he said. "I wouldn't do that." She tilted her head. "But I am not yours." Ellis placed his bowl aside. "You don't have to be mine for me to care." Rinya blinked slowly, like the concept was foreign. "In my world," she said, "only blood shares food. Only owners give warmth." Ellis leaned back, watching her. "In my world, people get to choose who they care about, who they protect." She stared down at her stew, silent for a long moment. "Then do you choose me?" The question was so small, it nearly broke him. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he got up, crossed the room, and brought out an old bag from the storage closet. Inside was a spare blanket, a small pillow, and a child-sized cup he'd once used for measuring coolant, but cleaned and scrubbed until it gleamed. He laid it all gently on the floor beside her. Rinya didn't cry, but she looked at each item as though they were holy artifacts. She took the cup into her hands like it weighed the entire world. And in that moment, Ellis understood something terrifying and beautiful. He had chosen her, not out of obligation, not out of pity, but because something about the way she sat, barely breathing, waiting to be thrown away, lit a fire inside him he thought long extinguished. Later that night, as she fell asleep again on the couch, this time with the plush animal tucked beneath her chin, Ellis sat by the window and stared at the starless, artificial sky. He didn't know where she came from. He didn't know who had hurt her, but he knew this much: he would never let her go back, and whoever was chasing her, they'd have to go through him first. Echoes from the past. The days turned to weeks, but Ellis never marked the calendar. He stopped thinking in numbers. Instead, he counted by small changes. The first time Rinya smiled, not fully, not with her teeth, but just enough for her eyes to soften. The first time she reached for his hand, not because she was scared, but because she wanted to. The first time she spoke more than one sentence at a time. Her voice still carried hesitation, like someone stepping across cracked ice. But it was steadier now, clearer. She liked warm things. Blankets straight from the dryer. Hot soup with too much pepper. The little heater fan he kept near the couch. She would curl next to it like a cat, eyes half closed, listening to its soft hum as if it sang only to her. Ellis made space for her, not just physically, but emotionally. He cleared a small shelf for her drawings. He labeled a cabinet in the kitchen. He ordered a stuffed pillow with stars on it because she said she liked the shapes. She never called him father, not yet, but every time she looked at him, there was something deeper behind her eyes, something fragile, trust, maybe, or the beginning of it. Ellis didn't tell anyone she was staying with him. He wasn't hiding her, exactly, but he knew what questions would come, what forms would follow, what eyes might start to watch. Haven-6 was a functional colony. It didn't welcome complications. One evening, Ellis returned home late. A mechanical spill had knocked out the power channels on the west grid, and he'd spent hours crawling through hot metal ducts to repair them. His uniform was scorched at the sleeves, and his hands were covered in dust. But the lights were on in his apartment, the air warm, and the sound of quiet humming drifted from the back room. Rinya was sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing again. She looked up, and something flickered in her eyes. Worry, you are hurt, she said. Just tired, he replied with a tired smile. Got caught in a blast valve. She stood and disappeared into the bathroom, returning moments later with a damp cloth. Without asking, she took his hand and wiped the grime from his knuckles. Her touch was gentle, focused. No one had ever looked at Ellis like that before, not with concern, not with care, not like he mattered. You fix broken things, she said. Yeah, he replied. That's my job. She looked up. You fixed me. He froze. Rinya tilted her head, then placed the cloth aside. I want to be like you, she said, strong. Ellis shook his head. You already are. That night, after she went to bed, he sat by the terminal and did something he hadn't done in years. He accessed the restricted colony records, using an old technician override code. He searched escapee reports, lost alien miners, and refugee status lists. There it was. A report filed 3 months earlier. Slave camp escapees from a mining moon in Sector 19. A woman and a child fled during a patrol assault. The child was not recovered. The woman, believed wounded, was last seen hiding in the upper caverns. The image attached to the report was grainy, corrupted, but even through the static blur, Ellis recognized the eyes. It was her, Rinya's mother. Ellis leaned back, breath caught in his chest. He stared at the image until the screen dimmed. Somewhere out there, someone was still looking for this girl, and maybe someone still loved her. The next day, Rinya didn't speak much. She drew more than usual. When Ellis peeked at her papers, he noticed something new. The drawings had changed. No longer just stars and lines. Now there were figures. 2 small ones, and one taller, holding hands, standing under a big sky. He didn't ask who they were. He already knew. That evening they sat by the window as artificial dusk fell. The lights flickered across the colony towers in the distance, soft and gold. Rinya leaned her head against his arm. Do you think she's still out there? She asked. He didn't ask who. He just answered. I do. She nodded, silent for a moment. If she comes back, she said slowly, will I have to go? Ellis looked down at her. I won't make you do anything you don't want to, he said. She was quiet again. Then, in a voice so small it nearly vanished, she whispered, I want her to come, but I want to stay too. He placed his arm around her shoulder. Then we'll find a way, he said. Together. Later that night, when she was asleep, Ellis opened the comms array. He crafted a private message, encrypted and anonymous, and sent it across the colony network to the intersector refugee channels. Just 5 words. Your daughter is alive, safe. No name, no location, just a spark. He didn't know if it would reach anyone, or what danger it might bring. But somewhere out there, if her mother was still searching, she deserved to know. And if trouble came, well, Ellis had fixed machines all his life. He could fix this too. The visitor in the dust-free days passed. Nothing came from the message Ellis had sent. No reply, no signal bounce, just silence. But that silence felt heavy, like something waiting just beyond the reach of sound. Rinya didn't ask again. She seemed calmer now. She helped fold laundry, learned how to toast bread without burning it, and even learned to say thank you without whispering. Her drawings became brighter, fewer lonely figures, more suns, more people standing side by side. Ellis didn't know what to make of it all. He wasn't a father, never planned to be. Yet there he was, wiping paint from her fingers, 1 minute, and building a footstool for her to reach the sink the next. His apartment, once quiet and cold, was now full of life, and oddly, it didn't feel wrong. One evening, as the artificial sunset dimmed the street, Ellis stepped outside to retrieve a new air filter from the drop terminal. That's when he saw it, a shadow, half sunken into the far corner of the street. Too still, too tall to be local, a hood pulled over its face. Ellis didn't stop walking, but every instinct flared inside him. He made it back to the door, keyed in the lock, and stepped inside. Rinya, he called calmly. She looked up from her sketchpad, eyes immediately searching his face. Inside, lock the door behind me. She obeyed without hesitation. No questions. No fear, just silent understanding. Ellis went to the terminal and activated the building's old surveillance system. Most of the outside feeds were dead, corrupted from rust and years of neglect. But one camera, the one aimed down the alley, still worked. The hooded figure remained where it was, motionless. Hours passed. It didn't move. Ellis didn't sleep. He sat near the door, shock baton in one hand, a heavy wrench in the other. His breath stayed calm, but his eyes never blinked too long. By morning, the figure was gone, but something else had been left behind. On the doorstep lay a folded cloth. Inside it, a thin shard of crystal, alien tech, but old, faded, the type used by refugees to store personal memories, images, sounds, moments. Ellis closed the door and slid the shard into his cum reader. The screen lit up. It was a video file. A woman's face appeared tired, covered in ash and sweat. Her skin was the same soft lavender as Rinya's. Her eyes were sunken but unmistakable. She spoke in a mix of her native language and broken standard. If someone finds this, please tell her I never stopped searching. Her voice cracked. In the background, faint alarm sounds echoed. She is small, with eyes too big for her face. Her name is Rinya. She has a scar on her left wrist from when I broke the cuffs to carry her. I left her near a human world. I had no choice. Tears spilled from the woman's eyes. If you're human, thank you. If she's safe, please let me see her again. Then the screen went black. Ellis sat there for a long time. Didn't realize Rinya had entered the room until she stood beside him. Who is that? She asked. He looked at her. She says her name is Lyra. Rinya froze. Then her hand reached out, trembling, touching the edge of the reader's screen. She's real, she's looking for you, Ellis said. Rinya didn't speak. She just slid to the floor, her knees folding beneath her. Her eyes were wide, but no tears came, just silence. Later that night, after she had gone to sleep holding the shard to her chest, Ellis stood on the balcony. The air felt thicker, different. He activated a secure line and typed a short command into the relay system. A beacon code, low power, disguised as a system ping, but it carried coordinates, a location. His dart, not many could trace it, but the right person could, and one did. 2 nights later, just before dawn, someone knocked. Not loud, just 3 soft taps. Ellis opened the door slowly, his hand on the weapon tucked into the frame, but the figure outside didn't raise a threat. She looked smaller in person, thinner than the video. Her cloak was torn, one leg wrapped in cloth, her skin pale from malnourishment, but her eyes, those eyes were Rinya's. She whispered, "Is she here?" Ellis nodded. She didn't step inside. Her hands shook as if terrified it was a trap. "She's safe," he said. "She's been waiting." And then, as the first light of Haven 6's artificial sun spread across the floor, Rinya stepped into the room behind him. She saw the woman. The woman saw her. Neither of them moved. Then, as if the universe exhaled, Rinya ran. Lyra dropped to her knees as her daughter collided into her arms. Both of them cried, not with sound, but with breathless shaking. The kind of grief and joy that no words could carry. Ellis didn't move. He just closed the door behind them. Later, as the two sat together on the couch, Ellis placed a cup of hot broth into Lyra's hands. She took it with gratitude so deep it hurt to witness. "I thought she was gone forever," she whispered. "I buried that hope a long time ago." Ellis nodded. "I found her in an alley," he said, cold, hungry, but still holding on. Lyra looked at him, truly looked. "You kept her alive." "She did that herself," he replied. "I just gave her a place to breathe." Silence settled between them, but it was not heavy this time. It was full of something different. Peace. And something else too? A question neither of them had asked yet, a question Lyra finally voiced in the quietest tone. Can I stay? More than shelter. The morning light filtered through the window, soft and golden, casting a gentle glow across the small room. Rinya lay curled against her mother on the couch, her hand wrapped tightly around Lyra's fingers, as though afraid she might vanish again if she let go. Ellis watched from across the room, leaning against the counter with a quiet cup of coffee. He didn't speak, didn't move, he just let them have the silence. Lyra's eyes fluttered open, her body was still weak, her face pale, but her gaze was steady. She looked around the room slowly, her eyes scanning each corner, as if memorizing it. Her voice was hoarse. You didn't turn me in. Ellis shook his head. Didn't see the point. I'm a fugitive, she said softly. A mother who abandoned her child. Someone with a bounty still on her head. You're a survivor, he replied. That's not a crime. Lyra tried to sit up, but winced as pain shot through her side. Ellis moved to help, but she waved him off. I can manage, she whispered. I've had to for a long time. Ellis backed away, respecting the space. He poured a second cup of broth and placed it on the table near her, careful not to disturb the still sleeping Rinya. They sat in silence for a while. Then Lyra spoke again. I thought about her every single day, she said. Every breath, every step I took, it was for her. Ellis nodded slowly. She never gave up on you either. Lyra's lips trembled, and she looked down at her daughter's sleeping face. I didn't want to leave her, but they were coming. I was shot. I thought if I led them away. You did what you had to, Ellis said quietly. Her eyes met his. And you did more than anyone else ever would. You gave her warmth, kindness, you gave her safety. He looked away, almost embarrassed. She gave me something too. Lyra tilted her head. What? A reason to keep going. They didn't say more after that. Words seemed too small for everything they were carrying. That afternoon, Ellis found Rinya standing at the window, looking out at the colony streets. You okay? He asked. She nodded, but her voice was soft. She came back. She did, he said. She never stopped trying. I was afraid she wouldn't like it here, Rinya said, glancing up at him, that she'd take me away. Ellis crouched beside her. Do you want to leave? She didn't answer immediately. Then she shook her head. No, she whispered. I like it here. I like us. Ellis smiled gently. This is your home. No one's taking you anywhere you don't want to go. She leaned against him, silent. Later, while Rinya napped again, Ellis brought Lyra a change of clothes, simple, soft, something that didn't look like the rags she had worn for months. She accepted them with quiet gratitude and disappeared into the washroom. When she came out, Ellis barely recognized her. She was still thin, still tired, but something about her looked different. Not just the clean clothes or brushed hair. It was her posture. She no longer looked like someone hiding. She looked like someone waking up after a long, hard sleep. She sat across from him at the table, wrapping her fingers around the mug he had set down. Why did you help us? She asked, not accusing, just curious. Ellis didn't have an answer right away. He stared at the steam curling from his drink. I don't know, he said honestly. Maybe because I've been alone a long time. Maybe because when I saw her in that alley, something in me broke. She didn't interrupt. She looked at me like I was her last chance. He continued, and I didn't want to be the kind of man who walked away from that. Lyra was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and touched his hand. You didn't just give her a place to sleep, she said. You made her feel safe. That's a rare kind of kindness. Ellis met her eyes. I didn't expect her to call me anything, he said, but one night she called me Papa. Lyra's lips parted slightly. I didn't know what to say, he added. I still don't. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. You said you've been alone a long time, she said. I thought I was meant to be, he answered. What if you're not? He didn't reply. That evening, as they sat together watching Rinya draw on the floor, Ellis noticed something. She was drawing 3 people now, not 2, and above their heads, in her uneven, careful letters, she had written a single word, family. Later, when the girl was asleep and the world had gone quiet again, Lyra stood by the window, looking out at the empty night. I can't run anymore, she said. You don't have to, Ellis replied. She looked over her shoulder. I know I'm just a guest here, she whispered, but if I could, I'd like to stay. Ellis stepped closer. He didn't take her hand. He didn't lean in. He just said softly, you're not a guest. Lyra turned fully toward him. Then what am I? He looked at her for a long moment and said, you're home. Shadows returned. The following days passed like something out of a quiet dream. For the first time in years, Lyra wasn't running. Her daughter slept through the night without shaking awake, and Ellis no longer came home to silence. There were Voices now, laughter sometimes, the soft scratch of Rinya's pencils, the clinking of two mugs instead of one. They found a rhythm without trying. Rinya helped Ellis reorganize his workshop, handing him tools with surprising precision. Lyra, still limping from her injury, started tending to a small planter box on the windowsill, growing something green in a place made mostly of metal. It wasn't big, but it was hers. Sometimes, they all sat outside the apartment after dinner, listening to the quiet hum of the colony's power lines. Rinya liked to lean against Ellis, pointing up at the artificial sky and naming stars that weren't real. But peace never stays untouched for long. One morning, as Ellis walked to his post at the grid maintenance station, he noticed something that made his steps falter. A transport cruiser not colony issued had landed quietly near the south docks. It bore no markings, no cargo tags, and no registry was logged into the public terminal. He didn't ask questions out loud, but a pit formed in his stomach. When he returned home that evening, he found the door unlocked. He rushed inside, heart hammering, but everything looked normal, until he saw Lyra. She stood by the table, her back straight, her hands trembling. A small object rested on the surface before her, a tracking chip. Old corroded, but recently reactivated. Where did you find that? Ellis asked. Lyra didn't turn around. Her voice was tight, taped under the blanket Rinya sleeps with. Ellis felt ice crawl up his spine. She's marked, he said. She was. Lyra turned now, her face tight with fear and fury. I escaped the camp. They couldn't track us until now. Someone must have reactivated it, which means they're close. Ellis took the chip and crushed it with a wrench, sparks bursting from its core. It's gone. They won't trace this. One again. Lyra looked like she might collapse. She sat heavily into the nearest chair. I should have never come here, she whispered. I should have kept running. Stop, Ellis said firmly. You brought her to life again, and you gave me something I didn't even know I was missing. She looked up at him, her voice breaking. They won't stop. He nodded. Then we make sure we do. That night, Ellis didn't sleep. He unlocked the old security console hidden beneath the workshop floor, wiped off years of dust, and brought it back online. Inside was an old defense system originally installed during Haven 6's early frontier days, forgotten by most, but Ellis had once wired its sensors himself. He repurposed everything. Motion detectors, perimeter alerts, pulse drones. He even activated a shield jam of the kind that sent bounty signals into static, making a home nearly invisible to off-world scans. The next day, he prepared 3 travel packs just in case. He didn't tell Rinya the details, but she seemed to understand. She stayed close to Lyra, clinging tighter than usual. She asked Ellis to read to her that night, and when he did, she didn't fall asleep until the very last page. Lyra waited at the table, silent, as he returned. From her room, you know they'll come, she said quietly. I know, he replied. That's why we're not waiting anymore. She frowned. What are you saying? I'm saying we don't sit here and hope they miss us. We set the trap first. The next morning, they moved. Not far but far enough. Ellis took them to an old facility just outside the Colonia, former atmospheric relay station built into the rock face of the nearby cliffs. He'd helped restore its circuits years ago, and few knew it even existed. Inside, the walls still held emergency reserves, batteries, thick steel doors that hadn't opened in years. It was dry, hidden, safe for now. Ellis made it livable. He built beds out of storage cots, rewired the ventilation, hooked up an emergency water purifier, and made a small fire pit outside with cooking stones. Rinya called it the secret cave. Lyra called it a last chance. Ellis didn't call it anything. He just worked. That evening, while Rinya drew on the metal floor with chalk, Lyra approached him. Her limp was worse after the long walk. She leaned against the wall, arms folded. You should have let us go, she said quietly. You don't owe us anything. Ellis didn't look up from the control panel he was wiring. That's the thing, he said. I think I do. Why? She asked. Because I brought you trouble. No, he said, standing and facing her. Because you brought me family. Her eyes filled. I didn't mean to. Doesn't matter. She stepped closer, the air between them thick with something unspoken. I was going to take her away, you know, she whispered. Once I knew she was safe, I thought it would be better, cleaner. Ellis's jaw tightened. And now, I don't know, she said. Now I just want to stay with you, if you'll let me. He didn't answer right away. Then he reached for her hand, calloused fingers wrapping around hers. You're already here. A beeping sound broke the moment. Ellis turned back to the console, an alert, 3 biosignatures closing in. Armed, they found us, he said. Lyra's eyes hardened. Then we stand. He nodded once. No more running. The final stand and the forever home. The alarm lights blinked red inside the relay outpost. Ellis stared at the old console, jaw tight. The biosigns were clear. 3 hostiles approaching, fast, cutting through the cliffs on foot. No vehicles, no colony tags, bounty hunters. He closed the panel and locked it down. They'll be here in minutes, he said. Lyra stepped forward, securing a makeshift brace to her injured leg. Her jaw was clenched, but her eyes were steady. I won't run, she said. You won't need to, Ellis replied, grabbing the shock rifle and sliding a power cell into its chamber. We'll protect Rinya, both of us. In the corner. The girl listened quietly, her drawing chalk long forgotten. Her eyes were wide, but not with fear, just understanding. She was too young to fight, but not too young to know what love looked like when it stood in front of her with its fists clenched. Ellis handed Lyra a signal flare device. If something happens to me, he said, shoot this. It'll alert the nearest colony patrol. Might take hours for them to respond, but no, she cut in. We don't speak like that. Not tonight. Ellis gave a tight nod. Then the outer sensor flashed. They were here. The first explosion came from the cliffside, a small breaching charge that rocked the outer layer of the outpost. Dust rained from the ceiling as the lights flickered. Ellis moved fast. He activated the defensive turrets, rusty, but still capable, and armed the motion mines he'd hidden along the trail. The old systems groaned to life, casting humming blue lights across the darkened halls. A voice rang out from outside, amplified and cold. We know you're in there, human. Hand over the woman and the child, and we leave you breathing. Ellis stood just inside the blast door. You want them? He raised the rifle, thumb resting on the activation switch. Come take them. The hunters entered, one tall and armored, wearing a scarred exosuit, another short and fast, darting ahead like a shadow. The third was the worst half, cybernetic, with a glowing red eye and a jagged blade arm. They didn't expect the turret on the ceiling. It spun and spat plasma, hitting the short one first. He dropped without a sound. The big one took a glancing shot to the shoulder but kept moving, raising a shield. He rammed into the main room, only to meet Ellis head-on. The two collided like metal on metal. Ellis fought without hesitation. He slammed his shoulder into the hunter, driving him back into the wall. The rifle cracked once, twice, until sparks burst from the hunter's armor. The man growled and lunged again. This time, Lyra was ready. She swung a steel pipe into his knee, sending him crashing to the ground. Ellis finished it with a final blast to the chest. The hunter slumped, unmoving. Only one left. The blade arm. He moved like a phantom, slipping past defenses and appearing in the room behind Rinya. She gasped and froze. Ellis turned too late, but Lyra didn't. She threw herself in front of her daughter just as the blade came down. It grazed her arm, slicing through cloth and skin, but she didn't stop. She screamed in a language Ellis didn't understand and tackled the hunter into the wall. The two struggled, but the cyborg was stronger until Ellis arrived. He slammed his boot into the hunter's back, grabbed the pipe Lyra had dropped, and drove it into the gap in the attacker's exosuit. Sparks exploded, and the red eye flickered and died. The hunter dropped. Silenced. Ellis stood panting, arm bleeding, body shaking. Lyra fell back against the wall, holding her arm. Rinya rushed to her side, eyes full of tears but no fear. We're okay, Lyra whispered, pulling her daughter close. We're okay. Ellis sat heavily on the floor. His weapon dangled from his hand, but the fight in him remained burning hot. Then a sound broke the stillness. Sirens. The colony patrol had seen the signal. Reinforcements were on their way. Hours later, after the dust had cleared and the attackers were taken away in chains, the three of them sat quietly outside the outpost. The artificial dawn broke across the cliffs, painting the world in soft orange light. Ellis sipped from a dented tin cup. Lyra sat beside him, her hand wrapped in his. Rinya leaned her head against his arm, her toy clutched in her lap. None of them spoke at first. Then Lyra whispered, they won't be the last, will they? Ellis looked at her. No, he said, but we won't be alone either. She nodded slowly. I don't want to run again. I want to stay. I want to build something with you. He looked at her, truly looked. You're not asking for shelter anymore, he said. No, she replied. I'm asking for a life, a future. Ellis turned to Rinya. She looked up at him with tired eyes and a small smile. He nodded once. Then let's go home. Weeks passed. The colony declared them a legal family unit. Lyra and Rinya were granted full sanctuary. The bounty was removed. Their story was shared across Haven 6, not as fugitives, but as survivors, as something even rarer. As heroes. The apartment became theirs again. Ellis rebuilt the burned walls, repainted the rooms, He and Lyra worked side by side, often quiet, often smiling. They didn't rush anything. Love didn't need speed. It needed roots. One night, Rinya handed them a drawing. 3 figures holding hands. Above them, written in careful letters, "My forever home." They framed it, hung it above the door. And as the stars blinked across the fake sky above, and the world kept turning in its quiet, broken way, one family remained strong, not because they were perfect, but because they had chosen each other, not out of duty, but out of love.